Yeah, welcome to our second Google Hangouts with the Bungalow Company and Noel from Motawi Tile. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited we could get together today and have an opportunity to talk about design and some of the work that you guys have been doing.
Sounds great.
It's interesting. I was listening to a really great TED Talk that you had given, and I found it, being familiar with your work, I still found it very interesting, not knowing much about your past. It was very interesting the way you started your business, your design, your tile and pottery business. We were kind of doing a similar thing at the same time. I was working in Seattle for a large architecture firm, and I went out on my own in '95, so a little later than you. But was really focusing on not working for somebody else, and kind of embracing the idea of being your own boss. It took me 20 years to figure out that was basically because I was unemployable by anybody else. But it was, and I found another parallel. I mean, I thought it was very interesting in looking at your tile work and also just listening to some of the things you had to say in the TED Talk. Was I see a lot of working with new concepts and natural concepts, but also having a strong connection to things from the past as well.
Yeah, that's a really important part of things for me, is I'm inspired by what I've seen and the things that have been made, which are so beautiful. So yeah, that's important, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I also find that it's been a very interesting parallel in times too. Certainly with some of the the arts and crafts inspired work, I feel like we've kind of gone certainly the '90s, and it was the land of the big box house, and you kind of couldn't, for us, you couldn't really talk people into much else unless they were going to spend a ton of money and be into a very high-end custom product. So I found it interesting that there was kind of a reawakening culturally to not just a style, but more a philosophical approach about how we would live. Oh,
yeah, that's part of being definitely a big piece of the attraction of the arts and crafts movement and thinking. One funny piece of the philosophy to me has always been the idea that the individual craftsman is the maker of, that there's no specialization in the workforce, really, that one person makes the whole piece. And even we don't do that. And the idea that a craftsman, that people could hand make things and they would still be really inexpensive, which turns out to be not true unless you're using foreign labor in this day and age. So if an American is going to make a piece, it's not going to be at Walmart prices. It's just not going to be a commodity priced item if it's handmade in America.
No, you're definitely right about that. We did a project about a year ago in Bethesda, 2 years ago in Bethesda, Maryland, and we tried to do an all-American made house. And it was very bizarre, the things that are made in this country and the things that are not made in this country. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was things as simple as nails. Like Maze Nails is one of the few nail companies. It's like most of the nails are coming from overseas, and never mind, more artistic products. There seems to be a niche market for that, but nobody wants, not nobody, but there are fewer people willing to pay the price for the quality. And I think the thing that gets lost is often that it's not just the quality of the product, but there's a huge intention behind making the right design at the right time, and how people react to that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I realize that there are some things some motifs that I refuse to make, and it must be the artist in me, because they are everywhere. And I mean, for instance, in tile, everyone makes a rope border, R-O-P-E. And I have resisted for 22 years so far because it's so ubiquitous, and I just don't want to make it because everyone else makes one, and I can't bring anything, or it's not a new thing. Now, the way I think about these things now is a little more nuanced. Is that if I'm going to do a theme that's been done over and over, a motif, then I should bring something unique to it. I should be able to do the most amazing pressed herb. You know, if I'm going to do herbs on tile, then I'm going to bring something to herbs on tile that's never been seen. And it's going to be really beautiful. Really, no matter what the motif is, the piece needs to be really beautiful and have all those aspects of quality design that I was talking about in my TED Talk, which we can bring those out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because there's a big difference between working with a motif in my mind, which is a lot of what we do, and making something authentic, as opposed to just trying to replicate something and make it feel like the past, or borrow from the past in a couple of key areas that leaves it feeling inauthentic. And I think they're very subtle gestures in whether you're designing a tile or designing a house, or on a grander scale, a neighborhood and a whole piece of land planning. I think that it's the subtle nuances, it's the collection of those. It's not necessarily like one big gesture. If you put a great Motawi tile fireplace in your track house, is that going to be beautiful in the track house? Yes, it will be beautiful, but does it elevate the whole? If the whole concept around it isn't good, it's hard for it to get the total experience.
I totally understand your point. Now, of course, as a person trying to make a living, I'm happy to put fireplaces in any house that someone wants. It's clearly more gratifying when it's part of a really beautiful whole package. There was something I wanted to mention about design. It made me think, when you were talking, it made me think about how I approach design with my staff as motifs versus larger concepts. I have a rule, which is that a word is not an idea. So someone might say, oh, we should do a ginkgo leaf. And I'll say, hey, that's great. Bring me a visual. I need to see an image that's very enchanting and beautiful, that somehow, when I look at that image, I can see a gorgeous Motawi tile in it. I can see how our technique would work, how I might frame it. So Nawal's rule is a word is not an idea.
No, that makes
Doesn't
sense.
Count.
That definitely makes sense, because I think that it's there has to be more to it. Sometimes it starts with a word. It starts with a. I did a restaurant one time where my client brought me a painting and says, "This is the kind of food that we're making, but I want it to feel like this." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, like this."
Wow, that's really helpful.
And after looking at this, sitting at my drawing board and looking at it for a week and struggling for a concept, eventually I started to connect with that piece and understood that I got the feeling finally, and the feeling led me down those avenues of exploration. And I think that oftentimes people they don't give exploration enough value. Until you've failed enough times, you really have, and you've turned over all these leaves, you really don't know that what you did the first time was good. Sometimes, you have to. I will laugh, because sometimes I actually will incite my own failure. I'll be like, okay, I've been looking at it this way for 3 hours, and I really think I've got it worked out. Now I'm going to flip this piece of trace paper over, and I'm going to face this house north, and I'm going to do 4 other things and see if I discover anything about it. And
right.
It's interesting. You usually do.
That's a great point you make about that stuff that happens in your brain while you're stumbling around trying to figure it out. I'm not even sure I give it enough importance, because in the sort of always many things going on that happens at Motawi, we've got, there's always some marketing thing going on, or a project, or a production thing, and it's not that I have to manage all those things by any means, but if you're pulled in a lot of directions, it can be really hard to take the time to stumble around, which
right.
you need to do. That's unromanticizing artwork. When I stumble around, eventually I make things that people really love, so it's very productive in the end. But it does take time that doesn't feel productive.
I think the other thing with that too is, like, we also, after doing it for a long time, and I feel really fortunate to have started pretty young, and I'm 47, and I feel like, a lot of people don't even get started till then, and
right.
And I do feel like there is this amount of time, and I forget the name of the book, but I think it was by this guy Robinson, who talks about the 10,000 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers or something. Or
Yeah.
maybe it was somebody else. Yeah.
And it is
Yeah.
interesting because you forget that you've been in, and especially as the business owner and really the conceptual artist and design direction for a company, you forget that you are able to work through some pretty major concepts at a different rate. Just with your sheer amount of experience and kind of that whatever that corporate knowledge is or whatever that craft knowledge is, you're able to it's what do they say? It's like, what are you paying me for? It's like, you're not paying me for this design, you're paying me for the 20 years of experience I have to be able to do this design.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point. It would be nice if when people are, worried about the price it costs for something or for design, that's understood. So it's good to be talking about it right now.
Well, I mean, and I think a lot of times people don't see the embedded cost of design in whatever they buy, and I think that the issue with making something like you guys have an inline product, but that you end up customizing.
Yes.
And we're kind of the same way. We do things totally custom for people, but we also do have an inline product that we customize. And I think that it's very transparent how much it costs to design that, as opposed to going out and buying a new Audi sedan or something where the design, there's a ton of dollars in design, and it's just not transparent. I mean, you're walking away with this physical thing, but it doesn't say, there isn't a line item on there that 30% of this vehicle was paid for as design and research and development.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. One other thing that people makes a big difference in people's understanding and love of Motawi is if they've come on a tour of the Tileworks or not. So we actually do free factory tours of the Tileworks every single week. Thursdays at 11 a.m. You can just show up, and people are uniformly entranced by that. Kids, we have children come through, we have seniors come through, we have people that are into manufacturing, people that don't care about that. Everybody comes away with a much broader, deeper understanding of what it takes and a good understanding of why it might cost what it does, so there's just no substitution for being there and seeing it, really.
Right.
And really, the web would work.
Well, and I think the other thing too, when you get something that's handmade, it still has a method of being produced. I mean, I think that people have really lost track of what it does take to actually make something. I mean, I see that in some of our clients, and I do see that we've become kind of separated from how we make things, how we grow our food, how we do all this other stuff. So I think it's when people really, step beyond the Home Depot experience, where it's enough work to go buy that rope tile at Home Depot and and actually install it right on a wall. Never mind, like, what does it really take to say I've had an idea, and my ideas are strong enough that I built a a way to manufacture and craft these things and sell these things. And every day you're and it's not like you're selling to a massive chain store. Your stuff is unique enough that there's a specialized market for it.
Yes, one could wish that the mainstream loved Motawi, but it wouldn't. Of course, it wouldn't be us. We really do, as you said, we make a line of tile, and we don't stock it, much of it really. All the tile for installations is made to order. So when tile is made for a project, it really does come out and get spread out on a big table. And we look at it to make sure all the parts match in the way that we think they should before we put it in a box and send it to the customer. So we're our own harshest critic here at Motawi.
Well, it's kind of the same thing with us too. It's like people will look at part of our business and say, oh, look, they have these plans that are ready to go. And I can tell you that if everybody just bought those plans ready to go without any changes, it would be a much simpler business. But it's really more like, I think it's more like buying a suit. It's a pattern. It's a pattern for like, we're going to take this house plan. We're going to talk to you about how you live, what the orientation is, what the site is, and then you start cutting the cloth and you start stitching in the modifications, the alterations to it, and before you know it, I mean, there's no two alike.
That's a great metaphor. I love that. I'm going to use that.
Well, and I think the other thing that's interesting about that is people. It's part of leading them on that exploration. It's the idea that don't feel like if you're going to build a house that's $500,000 or $600,000 or $200,000 don't be caught up with making a couple of changes. I mean, with any luck, if that house is the better job you do applying that house and making it somebody's and responding to the land, the more likely that house is to have a super long life, to become part of the urban fabric, to really accentuate the essence of what that neighborhood or what that place is. Otherwise, if it's just a bad idea, you can see how those things will come and go in a short period of time.
Well, I love just the idea of having a full neighborhood that's cohesive. It doesn't happen that much, but I really love it. Mm-hmm. It's lovely when that can happen. And there are definitely, we can all think of signature houses in our towns that it's not that anyone decreed that. It's just that when I talk to a person from a different walk of my life and I say, oh, that house on Woodlawn, and they say, yes, I know the one. It's beautiful, and that's pretty wonderful. And it's great to be part of those kinds of houses, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, and that's where design's the difference, and I don't think design is always like you use that example of like a key house in an old neighborhood. It's not that some famous architect designed it, or it was it can be fairly anonymous, and it really is more about people getting it right, and a lot of times I think that in design people getting it right is just being open to the possibilities. Mm-hmm.
And taking some time to really think. And not always go with the first idea, but let things stew, and not being in a hurry helps a lot.
My dad's a contractor, and he always says a home builder, craftsman, artist, really, and he always says time is the enemy of all good work.
Ah, I get that.
Yeah. But I it's always interesting to see. I really kind of more nuts and boltsy. Talking about laying out your tile, and I got something pretty interesting in your TED Talk when you flashed on that fireplace. And there's a fireplace that's the ugly fireplace.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. It's kind of like designing for. I explain it to clients like designing for new technology. And when you look through an old arts and crafts plan book, or you look through photographs of old houses, and you go as far back as to some of the patterning books, like design standard books, the old AIA design standard books. Fireplaces were a few different sizes, really, and everything worked pretty well with them. Now with the invention of the gas fireplace, it seems like we're constantly fighting a mythical dimension back and forth that tiles don't necessarily work for, and and often it's really a last-minute decision for people, and it's one of the biggest focal points in the house. And I think that tile thing is important.
Yeah, it is a myth that fireplaces are a standard size these days, and we do get customers assuming that they can take a picture of a fireplace that we've made, design A, and apply it. And to some degree it's true, except that it won't fit and we have to adjust. I mean, the idea, it's what you're saying is true. You can't always take what seems like a standard size tile and that's about 4 by 4 inches or so and plop it across a fireplace and it'll work. But who wants to just use 4 by 4s on the fireplace facade anyway? So I would say that we embrace the differences and really understand that we're looking for homeowners to get the areas to be tiled professionally measured. And we like to see photographs of the area. We don't, it would be great if we could go to visit every person's house. That would really increase the cost quite a bit if we got to luxuriate in spending our time that way to go and visit and measure every house ourselves. But just really seeing what's going on with each house is indispensable, really. And I think there's a lot about it that's just not obvious. It's not common sense. Common sense says there's some standard sizes, and in tile and fireplaces, and it's not really true.
Yeah, truer words not spoken. I mean, it's interesting. We have a kind of a 3 or 4 of the fireplaces that when we're using gas fireplace that we use because we kind of understand them and they're the right proportion for most of our work. But everyone, certainly now, like there's been whether it's an arts and crafts house or it's a house that's more contemporary, there's been a lot of emphasis on these very horizontal fireplaces, and they're really difficult to figure out because they don't, the dimensions are often, the cut sheets from the manufacturer are a little elusive to say the least.
I know what you mean by that. Yeah, if something's really horizontal, it just is going to have a really different look and feel than a Rumford fireplace or something, that's taller and skinnier or more blocky. We spend a lot of time looking at the proportions and trying to make them pleasant. And they may seem like a sort of soft word, but I'll give you an example. We make a 6 by 6 inch tile, and a border that someone might use a lot is 2 by 6 inches, and so you've got the 2 inches juxtaposed against the 6. You know what? It's a very static and boring proportion, I find. So if I've got 8 inches to deal with, I'll put a 1 inch trim piece on either side of that 6 inch piece, and that difference in size is much more dynamic than the difference, than being 1/3 of something. The 2 by 6 against the 6 by is boring. The 1 by 6, the 1 by liner is much more exciting and interesting and pleasing. So there's just some general things like that I'm always noticing, is the proportion of shapes and the proportion of sizes to the space and the sizes of your units to each other. That's before you get into color and before you get into relief design or anything.
Right, it's just like, working with those pieces, we end up in a similar situation, and whether it be window proportioning or columns outside of the buildings, and it's not, it's not a big difference that makes a huge difference. And I think it's the tension it creates, and and the negative space that it creates is often what people see in real life, but I don't know that it's always what they know that they're seeing. There's something they like about it, and I feel like they can't put their hands on it. They can be like, that really feels different, but they're not exactly sure what it is. But when I look at it, I almost feel like it's like you go from seeing negative space back and forth. It's like I always feel like I'm cutting things out in my vision, and I always wonder how it looks to somebody who doesn't look at things like that every day.
Wouldn't that be fascinating? You look with your client's eyes. We try, of course. That's all part of designing, is talking to, it's usually a couple or a homeowner about what they're seeing, what they like, and sliding ideas in front of their eyes and seeing how they react. Every meeting is a little process of, let's test an idea, test this color, and seeing how people react, and then keeping on working on the ideas that people love. And you're right. People that aren't designers, they don't know how to make it pretty. But most people know when they see it. They know when they see something that they really like. They know that. The ones that don't are really tough customers to work with. But as designers, we're good at that.
Right, and I think you take clues from them, body language, what they're talking about, what they've shown you. And I mean, the beautiful thing about a product like yours or a product like ours is that usually people come in the door with something liking a general aesthetic or something about what it is you do. I mean, it must be hard. I think about people who are a lot more generalists, and it must be tough to be like somebody comes in because you were under A on the phone book.
Yes, you know what? Back in my first days in the garage, I had an ad in the phone book because it was inexpensive and seemed like what you do if you're in business, and it was productive. I took it out after a year, and I would call them and say, do not put me in the phone book, because it led people down the wrong path for what they were looking for. They would always call and ask for grout, or they were looking for something that was not tile that's amazingly beautiful and it's going to cost a couple of $1,000s to do your fireplace. So it would create frustration for both the customer and myself. So I took Motawi out of the yellow pages and have kept it that way. Yeah, because we would get put under contractors and dealers. So isn't that a funny thing that getting lumped in with the general really was counterproductive for everyone?
It's not much different with us too. We had the similar yellow page experience, and what I found is like when I started asking where people found us trying to be the armchair marketeer that I am, I would find out that it's like, oh, I found you in the yellow pages, and after a while I realized what they were calling for was price. Because there was nothing about Bungalow Company was pretty high up in the, alphabetically, and people would come and be like, well, how much will you draw me a set of plans for? And I would always be like, well, that's kind of like buying a car by the pound. I mean, what are you asking me to do? And are we even a fit? And and what are you looking for? So I always found that was Yellow Page is very counterproductive. Well, it is interesting. I feel like the internet was a great thing for this. It really gave us I don't know how we would have worked as nationally as we've been able to, and have kind of a following and it's like a group that we all are connected to, and I don't know how that would have been a lot slower and probably a lot smaller. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but certainly the internet, when we started, we put our first website up in 1995, and it was kind of it was bizarre. A friend of mine built the website, and it was quirky, and there was nothing about business with it, and it was just about kind of these few plans that we had in this idea. But it brought a lot of people out of the woodwork, and it was interesting, to kind of evolve with that and see, where we found our niche, and how, and the kind of people that we connect with, which I think it's really interesting that there is a certain social value in this internet piece, and we seem to connect with people with like minds and like desires, and I find it's pretty rewarding that way.
Definitely. Well, I love the net because it takes a company that basically, if our company had to live on only what we could sell in the nearby or the regional area, we might not really make it. But being able to have a national audience for the slice of aesthetic that we're willing to make makes it possible to have a company. There was one thing I was thinking about as you were talking, related to arts and crafts mentality of the workers, and to something that we do at Motawi, which most people would be surprised to hear about, which is that we employ Toyota-style lean production methods. Now, the Toyota guys would call it Toyota-style production. And how we got into this was that back in 2003, I was looking around the business and saying, hey, this is great, we have a nice reputation, but frankly, we're not really making much money, and this is a problem to me if I'm going to keep making tile. And my business partner at the time went looking for information on lean manufacturing. And there's a point coming here. The sort of expert who had just written a layman's book on lean manufacturing on Toyota was Jeffrey Liker. Jeffrey Liker lives in Ann Arbor, where I live. And so we called him up and said, can we talk? We're this funny little tile company. It's an artisan company, but we need some more help because making tile is manufacturing. And he said, oh, yes, I can help you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring by a PhD candidate that I'm working with. And this young man had posited that you could apply Toyota-style production to a high variability, meaning lots of different SKUs and lots of varying amounts of all of them, but a low volume operation, which was us to a T. And we embraced it. The only caveat was that we couldn't take his free advice and not apply it. Otherwise, he would stop and go find another company that would actually do the experiments. So we said, yes, sir, we will do what you say, and much of it was counterintuitive at the time. We used to make a lot of lists about what to do. I guess what's a great example is the inventory that we used to keep. We make our tile on a press, and the setting up the press takes a bit of time. In those days, it would take almost half an hour. And so whenever we put a mold on the press, we would tend to press at least 50 of whatever it was that we had on the press. Whether 50 was just enough for one order, or if 50 of that particular piece was going to be a 5-year supply, we would make 50. And what ended up happening is that we had a lot of extra tile halfway made. So we would press it, we would dry it, we would fire it once, and then that makes what we call bisque tile that then still needs to be glazed. So we ended up with tons and tons of this bisque tile that we didn't need yet. And of course we had spent a lot of money to create that tile, which wasn't doing us or our customers any good. Meanwhile, making 50 of something instead of 5 of them meant that the wait for the tiles that people really wanted would get longer and longer and longer. Big problem. So our lead times would be very long and a little bit, unreliable. And that's clearly a problem for anyone. So we learned that he came in and said, look, you've got to change your changeover time. What you think, what takes half an hour, you need to cut down to like 5 minutes. So start working on it. Really needed a really big change. And actually that's the first thing that we did. We, thought a lot harder about it, tried some new things, tried a little different setup, and did get the changeover down to, in most cases, 5 minutes or less. So then we could make 20 different parts in a day instead of 5 different parts in a day. Made us much more nimble. And that's just one little piece of the many initiatives that he brought to the Tileworks. We also use a Kanban system, which a few of your viewers might know that word. It's a lot to explain, but it allows us to keep our beautiful gift tile in stock at all the time and make the right amounts of the right tiles at any given day. We know exactly what we need to be making to satisfy customer demand. And it doesn't take any of the art out of it at all.
Right, it almost sounds like it's more like dealing with the entire project at one time rather than trying to find some efficiency in having an inventory that costs you money and you may never get the full value out of the inventory because you may or may not ever need it or need it in a timeline.
It's true, yes, that's a big thing. One of the other facets of lean, which falls in line with arts and crafts, is this idea that the line worker, the person who's actually making the stuff, understands the process better than other people. And it's their job to make sure that things are perfect coming out of their department and that they can stop something if it isn't right and that they're the best place to come up with improvements. And so we really listen closely to what they're doing because they're the specialists, they're the experts in pressing a tile or dealing with the clay. I don't do it every single day as closely as they do. So they know, and they have the power and the responsibility even to make sure the stuff is coming out right and to stop. If there's something wrong with the clay, they don't press it, and they come and say, okay, you gotta come help us figure this out. So it puts control in the worker's hands and a lot of responsibility as well.
And that's probably similar with us too, especially with our inline plans, our more ready to go plans. There's there's a pretty strong direction in there, and there's no real inventory of them. They're more like they're digital, and people make changes to them. But there are a lot of stop and start processes, and whether it be a zoning department or it be a historical commission or it be a budget issue, there's a lot of places along the way where you're like, okay, someone needs to know to pull the plug, or tell the client to pull the plug, and wait a minute.
Yeah.
Before, you could, and it's kind of interesting because you could run through and get the whole project done in one sitting, but you might find that, one, the client couldn't afford it, two, that you were, outside of the zoning laws or building code or whatever it is, but, training people to, know how to ask those questions and when to ask those questions is kind of an interesting, process, but I think it's also, the more people do it, the more confidence they have with it, and the more reliant you become on them as a collective group.
Well, yeah, that's the service that you provide.
Yeah.
As homeowners clearly are often not doing these kinds of projects more than once in their life, so they can't be expected to know these things.
Yeah, no, they kind of, between us and the builder and all the suppliers, for us, it always seems like there's a order in which it all goes together, and it's usually all the same parts and pieces, but never in the same order. Just.
Excellent.
Well, I've really enjoyed being able to talk with you today, and hear how you guys do what you do, and kind of the some of the shared philosophies of design, and how we go about it. I find it interesting that we're more of a service and less of a product, and you're more of a product and less of a service. But sharing that artistic bent in both of those places brings similar challenges for sure.
Sure does.
All right.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Bye.